He looked at the stolen silver oak leaf pinned to my tuxedo, and the champagne flute in his hand didn't just tremble, it shattered against the marble floor. Commander Vance Thorn had spent 20 years building a fortress of lies out of medals he never earned and sacrifices he never made. But as I stepped into the light of the Mediterranean Gala, the ghost of a ridge in the Hindu Kush walked in with me. He thought the mountains had swallowed the only witness to his cowardice. Yet here I was, a long-haul trucker with grease under my fingernails and a memory like a steel trap, standing in his sanctuary of stolen honor. The high society music seemed to die in the throat of the orchestra as he realized that the man he'd left for dead hadn't just survived, he'd come to collect the debt. The road to justice is a long haul, but some debts are too heavy to leave behind. You're watching Highway Stories Untold. When the world turns a blind eye to the truth, strong souls like you step up, drop your experiences in the comments and inspire the fight. The salt air of the Tyrrhenian Sea was a far cry from the smell of diesel and stale coffee in a Peterbilt cab, but it didn't settle my nerves. I was a long way from the Barberino Pass, where I'd left the ruins of a kidnapping plot behind just days ago. After shipping the restored 50s Iron Nose Peterbilt toward the port of Savannah to meet me back in the States, I'd intended to catch a flight out of Pisa and finally see my daughter Sarah in Florida. My duffel bag was packed, my mind was already on the Sunshine State, and I was looking forward to the hum of the interstate. But a name on a local news broadcast in a roadside cafe near Livorno had changed my heading. Commander Vance Thorn. To the world, he was a hero of the Afghan campaign, a rising star in NATO circles and the guest of honor at a private military gala held at a coastal estate near Lerici. To me, he was the man who had abandoned his post while the rest of us held a crumbling stone sangar against a wave of insurgents. I looked at the tuxedo I'd had to buy in Florence, a stiff, uncomfortable skin for a man who preferred denim and flannel. My hands felt too big for the silk lapels, and the shoes were too tight, but the weight in my inner pocket was familiar. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small, velvet-lined box containing a silver oak leaf cluster. It wasn't mine. It was the one Thorn had dropped in the dirt when he scrambled into the last extraction bird, leaving 3 of my men to be carried out in ponchos. He'd reported it lost in combat and later received a replacement, along with a commendation for valor under fire. I'd kept that scrap of metal for 2 decades, a jagged piece of the past that I'd carried through every way station and truck stop from Maine to California. Driving the rented Alfa Romeo up the winding coastal road, the engine whined in a way that made me miss the deep, guttural roar of a Cummins turbo diesel. The hills were lush, silver-green olive groves blurring past under a bruised purple sunset. It was beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate it. My internal compass was locked on the estate ahead, a fortress of white stone and arrogance. I wasn't there as a major anymore. I was Jack Mercer, a guy who hauled refrigerated trailers and minded his own business. But the business of stolen honor is a debt that never hits its statute of limitations. As I pulled up to the security gate, the guard looked at my invitation, a gift from an old NATO contact in Naples who knew I was in the country and knew exactly what Thorn was. "Enjoy the evening, Signor Mercer," the guard said, waving me through. I parked the small car among the Ferraris and Maseratis, feeling like a stray dog at a dog show. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was a map of the last 20 years, lines around the eyes from squinting at the sun through a windshield, a jaw that stayed set, even when I was sleeping, and eyes that had seen too much irreversible change to ever truly go soft. I pinned the oak leaf to my left lapel. It was out of place on a civilian suit, a violation of protocol, which was exactly the point. It was a beacon. It was a signal fire. Walking into the ballroom was like stepping into another dimension. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the clinking of crystal. Officers in dress uniforms from 6 nations mingled with Italian industrialists and politicians. I kept to the shadows near the tall French doors, my eyes scanning the room with the same practiced intensity I used to check my mirrors for a sliding trailer on an icy grade. I wasn't looking for a fight, not yet. I was observing. I saw the way the waitstaff moved. Young men and women with tight smiles and tired eyes, the kind of people Thorne had spent his life stepping over. Then I saw her, a young woman, maybe 24, standing near the buffet table. She wore a simple black dress that had seen better days, and she was clutching a tray of appetizers like a shield. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was staring at a group of senior officers with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. She wasn't a guest. She was a server, but she was frozen. A few feet away, a man in a crisp Navy commander's uniform, Thorne, was laughing, his back to her. He was holding court, his chest a tapestry of colorful ribbons that told a story he'd never actually lived. I watched as a younger officer, a lieutenant with a face like a hatchet, leaned in and whispered something to the girl. She flinched, almost dropping the tray. He reached out and gripped her upper arm, his fingers digging into her skin. I could see the bruise forming even from across the room. He was Thorne's adjutant, a mini version of the man himself, arrogant, entitled, and convinced that the uniform made him untouchable. "I told you to clear the glasses, Elena," the lieutenant hissed, his voice carrying just enough for me to catch the venom. "Don't make me remind you who pays your father's medical bills." The girl's lip trembled. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. It was the same dynamic I'd seen in 100 truck stops. A bully picking on someone who couldn't fight back because they had too much to lose. Thorne didn't even turn around. He just kept laughing at his own joke, a glass of vintage Cristal in his hand. He was the sun this little solar system revolved around, and he didn't care who got burned by the heat. I felt that familiar heat in my own chest, the quiet protector waking up. I'd spent the last week saving a girl from a villa in Tuscany, and I was supposed to be done. I was supposed to be heading for Florida. But the road has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be. I started walking toward them, my gait slow and deliberate, the heavy tread of a man who spent his days on steel plating and asphalt. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a recovery vehicle, and there was a wreck that needed clearing. Thorne's face didn't just lose color. It turned the shade of a curdled gallon of milk left in a trailer during a July heat wave. He looked at the silver oak leaf on my lapel, and for a second the Mediterranean breeze through the French doors might as well have been the freezing wind of the Hindu Kush. Around us, the chatter of the Gala died down, replaced by that heavy, expectant silence you get right before a multi-car pileup on a fog-slicked interstate. The elite of NATO's command, men with chests full of brass and egos to match, started drifting toward us, their curiosity piqued by the sudden friction in the room. I don't know who you are," Thorne stammered, his voice jumping an octave, losing that gravelly command he used for press conferences. He reached for his champagne glass on the bistro table, but his fingers were trembling so violently he knocked it over. The crystal shattered against the marble, a sharp final sound that acted like a starting pistol. "Security! This man, he's a trespasser. He's wearing a stolen insignia. He's a fraud." I didn't move an inch. I stood there with the weight of 20 years of asphalt and 1,000-mile hauls behind me, watching him unravel. The lieutenant I'd just grounded was back on his feet, his face twisted in a mask of wounded pride. He looked at Thorne, then at me, looking for a signal to get aggressive again. Two security guards in black suits, carrying the unmistakable bulk of suppressed sidearms under their jackets, began weaving through the tuxedoed crowd. "You sure you want to stick with that story, Vance?" I asked, my voice carrying that low, rhythmic thrum of a diesel engine idling in a quiet lot. Because a fraud usually doesn't show up with the original receipt. I tapped the oak leaf on my chest. "You told the Board of Inquiry this was lost in the firefight at the Sangha. You told the families of the men we left behind that you stayed until the last bird was in the air. But we both know you dropped this when you scrambled over the backs of your own wounded to get a seat on the extraction." "That's a lie!" Thorne shouted, but his eyes were darting toward the exits, looking for a way out of the spotlight. "This man is a mental case, a disgruntled veteran. Get him out of here now." The security guards reached me, one grabbing my left arm while the other moved to intercept my path to Thorne. I didn't resist, not yet. I wanted the room to see the panic in his eyes. I wanted the distinguished guests, the generals, the ambassadors, and the Italian dignitaries to see the hero of the Ridge sweating through his dress whites. "Wait!" a voice boomed from the back of the circle. An older man stepped forward, his hair silver and his uniform laden with the stars of a full general. He looked at me, then at the leaf, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was General Aris, a man I'd briefed a dozen times in the green zone before everything went sideways. He looked into my eyes, and I saw the moment the recognition hit him. He didn't see a fat trucker in a cheap tuxedo. He saw the major who had refused to leave the Ridge until his men were accounted for. "Commander Thorne," General Aris said, his voice cold enough to freeze the champagne in the buckets. "Why is Major Mercer being escorted out of your gala?" "Major?" Thorne gasped, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Sir, this man he's a nobody, a driver. He's been stalking me for years." "I'm a driver now, Vance." "That's true," I said, stepping out of the security guard's grip with a shrug that sent a clear message. "Don't try it again." I looked around the room, making eye contact with the elites who were starting to realize they'd been applauding a ghost. I spend my days hauling freight, and my nights thinking about the men who didn't get to drive anywhere. Men like Miller and Vance's own RTO, who were still breathing when he signaled for the lift. The lieutenant, seeing Thorne's authority crumbling, decided to play the hero one last time. He lunged at me, his fist aimed at my jaw, a desperate attempt to end the conversation with violence. I didn't move my head. I just stepped inside his reach, my forearm meeting his bicep with the force of a loading dock bumper hitting a bay. I caught his collar with my other hand and used his own momentum to drive him back against the buffet table. Silverware clattered, a massive ice sculpture of a hawk tipped over and shattered, and the lieutenant ended up sprawled among the shrimp cocktail, gasping for air. The room was in total shock. Thorne backed away, his heels hitting the edge of the terrace. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, and I was the wind pushing him over. "You think you can just come here and ruin me?" Thorne hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and pure, unadulterated fear. "I have records. I have witnesses who say I was the last man on that hill. You have paperwork you forged in a base in Germany while I was still in a field hospital," I countered, pulling a folded yellowed manifest from my inside pocket. "But you forgot one thing, Vance. I wasn't the only one who saw you run, and I wasn't the only one who kept a record of the timestamps from the bird's flight log." I held the paper up for General Aris to see. It was the hard receipt, the irreversible change that Thorne couldn't undo with a loud voice or a polished uniform. It showed the exact minute he'd boarded the helicopter, 15 minutes before the final extraction call was ever made. "You're finished, Vance," I said, the words heavy with the finality of a locked trailer door. "The road finally caught up to you." Thorne looked at the paper, then at the silent, judging faces of his peers, and I saw the exact moment his composure dissolved into pure, visible panic. He didn't just panic, he broke. The air on the terrace didn't just turn cold, it turned brittle, the kind of sudden, bone-deep chill that hits a windshield just before the black ice forms on a mountain pass. Thorne looked at the yellowed manifest in my hand, and I could see his mind racing, downshifting and grinding gears as he tried to find a detour around the truth. But he was boxed in. The hard receipt I was holding was an 18-wheeler parked sideways across his only escape route, and there wasn't a shoulder wide enough for him to squeeze past. General Aris stepped closer, his shadow falling over Thorne like a heavy-duty gavel. The general's hand reached out, steady and expectant, and for a second, Thorne looked like he might actually bolt for the stone railing and the dark Mediterranean waves crashing against the cliffs below. The silence in the ballroom behind us was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of the commander's lungs. "Give that to me, Mercer," Aris commanded, his voice as sharp and cold as a bayonet. I handed over the flight log, the paper feeling heavy with the weight of 20 years of silence and 1,000-mile hauls. Aris adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the lines of handwritten timestamps, the irreversible change that proved Thorn had boarded the extraction bird a full 15 minutes before the final distress call was ever recorded from our position. It was a betrayal of the highest order, the kind of lie that rots a man from the inside out until there's nothing left but a hollow, decorated uniform. "This is a forgery!" Thorn shrieked, his hands flailing wildly, knocking a silver tray of crystal flutes into the marble floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed like a volley of small arms fire. "He's a trucker. He lives in a tin box on wheels. Why would you believe a grease monkey over a decorated commander who has served this alliance for decades?" "Because the grease monkey was the one pulling our men out of the burning rubble while you were drinking lukewarm water in a climate-controlled hangar in Bagram, Vance," I said, my voice staying steady and low, the rhythmic thrum of a diesel engine idling in a quiet lot. I didn't need a medal to remember the names of the guys we lost. I just needed a memory that didn't have a price tag attached to it. The elite crowd was no longer just watching a scene. They were witnesses to a total structural collapse. I saw the Italian ambassador turn his back, and a French colonel whispered something to his wife before they both stepped away, as if Thorn were contagious. The isolation was immediate and absolute. Thorn turned to his adjutant. The lieutenant I'd just dumped into the seafood display, but the younger man was busy staring at his own polished boots in a mask of pure shame. "Commander Thorn," General Aris said, his voice dropping into a register that made the hair on my arm stand up. "You will surrender your sidearm and your credentials to the duty officer immediately. There will be a formal inquiry, and God help you if Major Mercer's logs match the encrypted archives in D.C. "Sir, please," Thorn started, reaching out a hand that shook like a leaf in a gale, but Aris stepped back as if he'd been touched by something filthy. "Don't address me," Aris snapped, "and take off that oak leaf. You haven't earned the right to wear the silver, and you certainly haven't earned the right to stand on the same ground as a man like Jack Mercer." The confrontation was drawing more than just the high brass now. I could see the faces of the servers and the security guards, the people Thorn usually looked right through, watching him crumble with a quiet, satisfied intensity. He'd spent his career treating people like disposable equipment, and now the equipment was watching the operator fail. I watched as Thorn's eyes darted toward the lieutenant. He was looking for someone to blame, someone to throw under the wheels to save his own skin. It's a move I've seen 1,000 times on the road when a broker tries to pin a late delivery on the driver despite a blizzard. "This is his fault," Thorn pointed a trembling finger at the lieutenant. "He was supposed to verify the guest list. He allowed this agitator into a secure facility." The lieutenant looked up, his jaw tightening. He was a bully, but even a bully has a limit on how much of someone else's filth they'll carry. He looked at the general, then back at me. He saw the hard receipts in Aris's hand and knew the ship was sinking. "Sir," the lieutenant said, his voice cracking slightly, "the guest list was vetted. Major Mercer is here on a legitimate NATO invitation, and if we're talking about verification, maybe we should talk about the encrypted radio logs the commander ordered me to archive last month." The room went so quiet, you could hear the hum of the cooling units in the kitchen. That was the second irreversible change. Thorn wasn't just being exposed for a 20-year-old act of cowardice, he was being buried for a fresh cover-up. "You traitor!" Thorn lunged for the lieutenant, but his coordination was gone, his movements frantic and clumsy. I didn't even have to think about it. I stepped into his path, my shoulder meeting his chest with the solidity of a concrete barrier. I didn't strike him. I just occupied the space he wanted to be in. He bounced off me and fell backward, his polished medals clinking against the stone as he landed hard. "Sit down, Vance," I said, looking down at him. You've done enough running for one lifetime. General Aris signaled to the MPs standing at the edge of the terrace. Take them both. Separate rooms. I want full statements from the lieutenant regarding these archived logs before the sun comes up. As Thorne was hauled to his feet, his face was a mask of pure, visible panic. He wasn't the hero of the ridge anymore. He was just a man caught in the high beams of his own lies, and the road ahead of him was nothing but a dead end. I stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. 20 years is a long time to carry a load, but as the MPs led them away, I felt the suspension of my own soul finally start to level out. The terrace cleared as the MPs led Thorne and his lieutenant away, the heavy double doors of the villa swinging shut behind them with a finality that echoed across the stone. I stood there alone for a moment, the salt spray from the Mediterranean misting my face, feeling the phantom weight of 20 years finally lifting off my shoulders. It was the kind of quiet you only find in the cab of a truck at 3 in the morning on a straight stretch of Nebraska highway, a silence that lets you breathe again. The hard receipt had done its job. The truth wasn't just out, it was undeniable. And the power dynamic had flipped so hard it had shattered Thorne's entire world. General Aris stepped back out onto the terrace, his footsteps heavy. He didn't look at the Gala inside. He looked out at the horizon, where the first hint of grey was beginning to bleed into the night sky. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver case, and offered me a cigar. I shook my head. My lungs had enough diesel soot in them. I didn't need the smoke. You realized who he was the second you saw the news, didn't you, Jack? Aris asked, his voice weary. I never forgot his face, General. I've spent 2 decades hauling freight across every time zone in the States, and every time I checked my mirrors in the dark, I saw that Sangar on the ridge. I saw him jumping into that bird while Miller was still reaching for a hand. I straightened the lapel of the tuxedo, the stolen oak leaf still pinned there like a jagged piece of shrapnel. I didn't come here for a promotion or a headline. I came here because the road doesn't let you keep driving if your brakes are locked on the past. Aris nodded, looking at the yellowed manifest he still held. The lieutenant is already talking. He's terrified. He confirmed that Thorne has been suppressing digital records for months, trying to scrub the archives before his next promotion board. If you hadn't walked in here with that physical log, he might have actually made general. Paperwork is harder to delete than a hard drive, General. I turned toward the stairs leading down to the gardens. And some things, like honor, can't be coded. You either have it or you're just wearing a suit. Where are you going now, Jack? Aris called out as I started down the steps. Back to the rig? Florida, I said without looking back. My daughter's waiting, and after 20 years of looking in the rearview mirror, I think it's time I started looking through the windshield again. I walked through the manicured gardens of the villa, the scent of blooming jasmine thick in the cool air. Near the stone gate I saw Elena. She wasn't holding a tray anymore. She was wrapped in a heavy wool coat, her eyes fixed on the driveway. When she saw me, she stood up straight, a small, genuine smile breaking through the exhaustion on her face. They took him, she whispered, her voice light with disbelief. He won't be coming back, Eleanor. Not to this villa and not to that uniform. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver oak leaf. I looked at it one last time, the cold, hard proof of a coward's flight, and then I pressed it into her hand. Sell it, or throw it in the sea. It doesn't belong to anyone anymore. She closed her fingers over the metal, the weight of it a final gift of justice. Thank you, Major. Just Jack, I said, tipping an imaginary hat. I'm just a guy with a long haul ahead of him. I climbed into the rented Alfa Romeo, the leather seats cold against my back. I started the engine and felt the small car hum, a pale imitation of the 50s iron nose Peterbilt I'd shipped out of Livorno just days ago. As I pulled out onto the winding coastal road, the Mediterranean sun began to crest the horizon, turning the water into a sheet of hammered gold. The road ahead was open, no more ghosts in the mirrors, no more stolen debts on the ledger. Just the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt and the steady heartbeat of a man who finally knew that some loads are meant to be dropped. I shifted into gear and let the Italian coast fade behind me, my mind already crossing the Atlantic, heading for the humidity of Florida and the sound of my daughter's voice. The truth is the only map that actually gets you home. If this story reminded you that some things are worth standing up for, no matter how much time has passed, hit that subscribe button and join the convoy. We're building a community here of people who believe in honor, the truth, and looking out for the person in the lane next to you. Drop a reckoning in the comments if you've ever had to face down a ghost of your own. And if you want, tell us about it. It's an honor to have you riding. I'll see you on the next haul. Stay safe out there.